Okay. I think we're okay to get started. Christy, Rachel, you good? Okay. Welcome today. We are thrilled to have you for building safe systems while moving fast. This is a learning conversation. It's also an opportunity to connect with your PM/COP community. So really excited. Rachel Card, our executive practitioner in residence for MIT Sloan's product ecosystem, is going to lead our discussion with Christy Cull today. It's going to focus on what it takes to lead and grow a career in critical, safety critical product environments. It's also meant to be interactive. So we encourage your questions by chiming in, raising your hand, commenting on the chat. It's really about our community learning together. So did want to mention the session is being recorded, just so you have that awareness. We hope to share this with the other members of the community. Um, and that's it. I'm going to let Rachel and Christy take it over, but thank you so much. And we're thrilled that all of you are here. Welcome, Nick. I see you. Hi.
Thank you, Shauna. It's really excited to see everyone here today. We're very excited to have an EMBA alum, Christy Cull, join us today. Christy was one of my classmates, so we're EMBA 22s, which was a very fun and unique couple of years during the pandemic. We felt very, very lucky to be there. Christy is an entrepreneur technologist. She focuses on advancing robotics and sensing systems across autonomous and embodied AI. She has led sensing teams at Waymo, Lyft, and previously worked at Apple on autonomous systems and the LiDAR-enabled iPad. Her background spans the MIT Lincoln Lab, large-scale consumer products, with a consistent focus on building safe, intelligent systems. She wears many hats, I think, like all of us. She advises startups and VCs on mobility, digital health, and wearables. She serves as an adjunct professor at Columbia University, and she is a research affiliate with the MIT Media Lab. Christy has a PhD from Duke and an MBA from MIT. So in addition to Shauna's preface, we're excited to have Christy here today to talk a little bit about her career, to talk a bit about safety judgment, to talk a bit about the future and her philosophies. And just a reminder, as with all of us, we're really grateful for this community and to be able to have these really tight conversations. Also knowing that sharing is really important, I think, for any kind of conversation, but particularly in this space around safety and technology advancement. So just put a caveat that the opinions that whether it's Christy shares or I share or any of you share, we're all aware that these are our own personal opinions. They're not opinions of our current or previous employers. So with that, Christy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, yes. Happy Wednesday. Pardon my voice. It's a little bit on the rough side, but that aside, I'm delighted to be here first and foremost with all of you, and equally important, it's great to have this conversation with a friend and fellow classmate, Rachel. So thank you to MIT and Rachel. It's a joy to be here. So the goal here is to really have that intimacy from the standpoint of feel free to chime in. There's no question ill posed. And there's really no sense or thought of interruption. So you sort of heard about my background from Rachel. Just to shed a little bit of light as to what inspires me. I always like to point to whether in prose or in voice folks that inspire me. So I'm inspired by my mom and dad. I'm a mom, I'm a technologist, a physicist, a wife. While my experience has spanned, defense systems at MIT, Lincoln Lab, scaling consumer electronics at Apple, and deploying safety critical systems at Waymo and Lyft, I'm really riding on the shoulders of others. These are not all of the folks that I've highlighted here. There are so many, many more. And so as a part of that, I see myself as um, building on that foundation that others have provided and trying to bring forward best practices from aerospace grade rigor at MIT, large scale system integration at all of the companies that have been highlighted. One of the guiding principles that I learned, quite frankly, as a child from my mom and dad, it's not a quote that they authored, but it's certainly a tenet that we embody, which is, If not you, then who? If not now, then when? And that's really anchored on the principle of how are you going to leave the world and make it a better place tomorrow than what you have seen it in your experience today. So from that, I take the responsibility with others right in hand um, for ensuring systems that don't just function, right, but that they remain reliable and defensible in the real world. So I take that to heart, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a robot on wheels or on legs. So great to be here with you all today. Um, so what does that really mean, right? I focus on a systems-based approach to product safety. That could be when I'm driving technology on the verification validation side, which is, did we make a product that meets a spec? Equally important, did we make a product that the consumer can actually utilize? And ultimately, it's not thinking about safety last, but rather thinking about safety first, because products go into the hands of human consumers, they engage. What hazards did we understand and assess ahead of time? And also are learning about after the fact, right? So my focus has been on three areas: improving lives through safety critical systems, building integrated products that deliver ideally exceptional user experiences. So at Apple, it's the phrase is surprise and delight, not shock and awe, but surprise and delight. And I'm sure other companies embody that same verbiage. And lastly, developing high-performing teams, right? You can't just build something with one person. You're greater with more, and you can move faster by working together. And these teams, the goal is to execute, right, with technical excellence and accountability in mind, whether that be product, whether that be legal, whether that be engineering. It's all integrated to form a really great product, like the phones or vehicles that you and I both utilize every day, right? We can't imagine a world, some of us, without being able to connect really to our loved ones with the use of phones and other devices. So with that, let's sort of look at the intersection. I've mentioned defense, I've mentioned consumer, and I've also highlighted autonomous systems, right? We've heard a lot of the buzz around autonomous vehicles, how that impacts our everyday lives. And more acutely, we've been leaning into and understanding the utility of a lot of artificial intelligence in the form of hardware, whether it's a legged robot, a wheeled robot, or an AI pin that's helping our everyday lives, or some form of large language model that's augmenting the systems that we look at and work on. If we put it all together, right, you can look across the domains of consumer, autonomy, defense, and aerospace. You could see, at least at scales of volumes of ones, tens, millions as it relates to phones, right? 500,000 vehicles come off of a line, whether they're autonomous or not. Sort of level one, level two autonomy, level three, maybe. That's 500,000 vehicles, so very high supply. There's a clear trade-off here between scale and risk, right? And it's important that we assess this risk as technologists, as product leaders. So autonomous systems, and I'm going to focus on that just because I've spent a lot of my career focusing on that. That's at the intersection. So AVs, Waymo, for example, take on more of like an aerospace grade rigor with regards to structured validation, governance, and evidence-based safety at scale. So with that, let me pause. Any questions with what I've highlighted so far, whether it be about my background, whether it be about the systems-based approach, before we sort of start to talk about what products with safety first in mind would look like. And feel free to come off mute or type it in the chat, and we'll try to monitor those mechanisms to make sure your voices are heard. Any questions? I can't see the chat, so I don't know if Rachel, yeah, you see anything.
No specific questions yet, but there are some topics in here that are in some of your future stuff. So I do see some interest around frameworks and things.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll keep going and then we'll pause to see if there are any other thoughts or questions. Okay, so we're going to dive a little bit into, well, what are some of the frameworks that I've leveraged? There are many. I'm only going to name a couple as it relates to the building of autonomous systems and building these systems with safety in mind. So, if you would indulge me, let's take a step back. I'd like to think about how we can simplify, well, what does an autonomous vehicle do in general, and how is that data stored? What's that handshake in terms of the constellation of sensors, the orchestration of what those sensors produce, and the digestion so that at the end of the day, as an example, a vehicle knows when to stop and when to go, or when to pause, stop slowly, and move to the side of the road. Sense, think, and act. Sensing, similar to how our eyes interpret color with the cones in our eyes. There are a wide variety of sensors on the vehicle, and similar to an orchestra where you have your wind, your brass, etc., located in different parts of the orchestra to make something that's not cacophonous, but actually quite pleasant to listen to, it's important that we set up a constellation of sensors in a unique way. So we call that constellation, and then where we place sensors is the orchestration. So we move from sensing to say, I see images. What can I do with those images? And what would I want to have the vehicle do? So the thinking is what we call semantic segmentation. Is there a human? Is the human moving? Are there lights? Are there other vehicles? Right? It's that contextual awareness of the world around us. And then lastly, it's what are my actions? What is the vehicle going to do when it's driven by wire, right? Driven digitally. And how does the computer? So that manifests itself in sensors, compute, controls. You could see that decomposition on the left-hand side. And then what do we do with that data? Well, we don't just have one vehicle, we have multiple vehicles, right? So you're taking in a lot of data across a variety of vehicles, across a variety of geographies. That gets centralized into a data lake. So when we think about data farms and or what we call edge, right? So the edge would be on vehicle, and then cloud would be a data farm over AWS, or name your favorite computing cluster. There's a bunch of facets that are then employed that drive actions and contextual awareness, labeling, map development, model and algorithm development. And then, of course, what have we simulated before the vehicle was put on the road, before it was highlighted as it was safe for this geography, for this operating environment? And for this safety gate that we signed off. So there's tons of simulation, there's tons of human in the loop, there's tons of structured and unstructured testing before you might see, for example, a Waymo vehicle driving on a road. It's had thousands, millions of miles that it's simulated and driven ahead of that. So it's important we understand from sense to think to orchestration of data and not just sensors to the safety sign off. So a framework that has been helpful from Dr. Weck's class is called the Advanced Technology Road Mapping Framework, or architecture, sorry, or for short, ATRA. And the importance there is really, you're going to remember these questions from maybe even middle school. I'm not saying that that's where the inspiration was drawn from, but remember we were inherently asked the following questions. Start with the why, that there's a book on that in terms of organizational development and so forth. But like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how are we going to get there? More acutely, right? What are we doing today? Right? Where could we go? Where should we go? And where are we actually going? Which is intended to cull what's above the threshold, what's below the threshold. So there's a lot to unpack in this ATRA framework. I leverage it for a wide variety of inquiries at work across a wide variety of organizations that I've been part of. And soup to nuts here, as an example, as a framework would be like you start with what is it that you're trying to do? And you have to measure what matters. So if you're working on something, whether it be product creation or safety sign-off, if you aren't measuring what matters in the form of KPIs and key performance indicators or figures of merit, then what is it that you're measuring now and what are you moving toward? And then you can kind of read through after the session some of the other attributes from problem definition down through requirements, system design, and then there's the validation. Remember, I highlighted verification and then there's validation. So did you actually meet the requirements of a data sheet is insufficient. You have to also address, did you actually address what the product intended to produce in terms of features for a particular customer? So with that, I'll pause. I know I've spoken a lot. Sorry, Rachel, I went a little bit over. But with that, I'll pause and maybe we have questions and we can dive into some other topics. And hopefully this inspired some of those topics to questions to percolate.
Yeah, it looks like you had a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if Christy got to that. It was around, is safe system for autonomous driving development workflow? And I don't quite understand the question. Maybe you, if you're on, could you come off mute? Don't.
I can take a stab at it.
Okay, yeah, take a stab at it. Maybe they are stepped away.
Yeah, let me see if I will go ahead. So answer is what I just shared is not the transcript for, is not the solution for a safety critical sign off. What I would say is that it would depend. And I say that primarily because I didn't share this slide, which hopefully you can see it. Can you see it here? Yeah, perfect. I'll just zoom out here. Is in particular for safety systems, there are regulations and hazard analysis that one would need, risk assessment that one would employ internally. So you would have a safety management system that would govern the processes and the documents that you would then follow suit internally. Now, there are external regulations and standards. And those regulations and standards, just to name a couple here, would be the ISO 262, and one of the regulating bodies is NHTSA. NHTSA governs how human drivers drive on roads. And if you've read or heard of a lot of the conversations with Dimitri and Takitra, the co-CEOs of Waymo, a lot of what they highlight includes the statistics surrounding accidents and deaths on the road by human drivers, and how, the statistics for Waymo in comparison. Um, so hopefully that helps to answer. So that's another framework that you would utilize. Really, the overarching would be the safety management system. Yeah, which has a safety review board and has safety committee internal to the company. Before you would say, we are amenable to having a vehicle that's autonomous sign off for this particular geography and environmental circumstance. Yeah.
Great. There's another question in the chat. Nick asked if you've seen any parts of this change when incorporating LLMs.
Ooh, great question. So there is a lot that's being adopted and implemented in relation to LLMs, which, for any sort of autonomous system could be, in particular for autonomous systems, there's this fault tolerance. So you have redundancy of systems. I've seen, and you've probably read in the literature for robotics, the ability to interpret audible signals around a robot and to be able to highlight actions to a robot. The most change that I've seen is whether it's in academia or in industry, there is a trend for vibe coding. I'm not suggesting that there's vibe coding for safety critical systems, just to be super clear, but rather a mechanism to both collate data in meetings to inform actions, to inform, priorities, maybe even to highlight metrics across meetings. So I have seen definitely a ramp up of using large language models, in particular vision language models, which is to say that an image, remember how there's a saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words? Well, there's an actual implementation of a VLA. Off the shelf would be CLIP. If you search CLIP, which is to turn an image into a variety of words that help to annotate on the fly attributes of that image, and with enough data, right, to attribute different trends. So what I would say is AI isn't new, especially to the world of autonomy. how, and then if we decouple artificial intelligence into, okay, where does large language models, natural language processing, and then computer vision, machine learning, these are all sort of, branches of a theme that is known as artificial intelligence. So because it's not new to the community, the adoption had already been happening. What is new is the critical sort of S-curve adoption to how consumers and therefore not just software engineers and data scientists or electrical and computer engineers are leveraging large language models more so in their day-to-day, right? And summaries and so forth. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah,
The
thank you. That was
pleasure.
great. Appreciate it.
And I think that Lorena had a question that's related. How have you seen an expectation for much needed higher speed to launch with the introduction of AI-enabled development processes? Do you feel that? I think there's a bit of FOMO we all feel, just in general, but from the product perspective and launching, are you seeing a trend there?
Yeah, great. I'm trying to think about how to answer. So here's what I would say, and I'm going to take it in a different direction, and then I promise I will answer your question, which is I would argue that the best technologists and leaders, um, and by best, granted, that's subjective. So adding some objectivity to it would be you're not choosing between speed and safety, right? But you're building organizations that are going to learn faster than the risks they create. And so why I'm inserting safety, just in terms of the overarching theme of today's conversation, is if you're sacrificing safety, there's something fundamentally wrong with that process, right? So now there's an embedded question here, Lorena, and maybe I took it in a different direction. So I'm going to circle back, which is I think it depends on the industry, right? When you're at the intersection of software and hardware and platform, you have to be really mindful how you're leveraging these tools. So there also needs to be an accountability of these tools. So maybe some of us have heard of model cards. So in the case of, let's just draw an example, right? NVIDIA has a variety of platforms used in autonomous systems in general, health and other markets, right? So um, there are also algorithms that are being employed and released by NVIDIA. So when you're leveraging these algorithms, whether it's freemium, whether it's licensed, or whether it's generated internally, model cards are one that hold those algorithms, those AI model solutions accountable to what data are they being trained on, and then what are the outputs? And there's traceability to what's being put into the system and what's being put out. So why I highlight that is because if we automatically use a variety of different algorithms and AI features and functions without understanding what they're being trained by and how we might adopt or adapt frameworks and updates, right? The weights, we might be getting, as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. So you need to know where your information is coming from in order to understand the value that is being provided by that service or function or feature. And so I just want to caution us. Yes, there's this impetus to be hasty because there's so much competition now that's higher. Um, yeah, so we just need to be mindful. That was long-winded, but hopefully that answers your question. And I know, Rachel, you've had experience in this area too. Anything you want to kind of highlight from your um, experiences in this like ever-changing world of AI function this, AI widget that, right? Just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I know we've talked about it over the past few years. One interesting thing to think about is that combination you talk about of hardware, software, and data, or cloud, or whatever that third bucket ends up being called, the service side too. When the company owns that end to end, I think that there are a lot of benefits to that because it offers the ability for you to make something that is magical, right? You don't see the seams across the hardware, the software, and the service. At the same time, I personally believe it creates more responsibility for the company and for the engineer or for the MBA leader to understand that you are like this, you are looking at this end to end, right? And When I was leading the Xbox Series X and Series S, we thought about this a lot because we had that full end-to-end kind of development chain inside the team. We were not leveraging AI as much. This was pre the AI as much, right? Inside of gaming and inside of games, obviously, but as far as the hardware. But one thing that I think is unique, and Christy, you have such a fantastic experience with this, is the hardware piece has such a longer lead time. And so we felt the FOMO, right, from the leadership or from the customer, really on the stuff that's so quick, like software, right? Like you can turn on updates, you can turn out new OSs very quickly. But that hardware side, it is so iterative to develop, especially when you're building silicon. It is so iterative, and it is critical you get it right because it's very, very, very expensive. And so, for us, it was during the pandemic, and that created a lot of interesting other safety considerations that we, quite frankly, were really ready to jump in and handle, even though we never could have foreseen that, having our hardware being shipped from China during the pandemic, both internally and then externally to customers. But there is a process you have to follow for that. And then it's so expensive that once you launch, getting that back in and iterating on it is really hard to do, right? So not only do you want to get it right from like a safety perspective, like, the holes in the top of the Xbox Series X, yes, a toddler's fingers could fit in there, right? It's not how it's intended to be used, but it definitely will happen. What then, right? What happens then? And how do we predict those things, the things you can predict, but at the same time from the customer delight perspective or from the customer expectation perspective? I think that there was another interesting question that I think came, to me just in a direct message. We had talked about this a little in our prep, Christy, on kind of the legal side of these systems, right? Like none of this can be, bulletproof, for example, but the public expectation, like with the Xbox, with these autonomous, whether it's a vehicle or any system or whatever it is, especially I think with the AI, the way AI is being talked about by companies right now, there's a real high public expectation. So I'm curious of your general perspective on how you think about maybe bridging those, legal responsibilities, the legal aspects with kind of the safety side of development.
Yeah, ooh, that's a heavy question.
It's a heavy question.
Heavy question. Great question. So when we talk about legal, it's liabilities. When we talk about safety, it's hazards. They go hand in glove. When we talk about just because the system is safe, doesn't mean it's compliant. Just because the system is reliable doesn't mean it's safe, right? So I just want to put that out. First, before I answer the question directly, I'm gonna shift it in a different way, and then I promise I'll answer the question, which is one lesson that has remained constant, whether it's consumer electronics, defense, autonomous systems, is in how it relates to sort of safety and legal, which really is liability, is physics. It doesn't really care about deadlines. Right. So when we think about objects that can pose harm, it's momentum. It's what's your safe distance? How fast is it moving with regards to a human being present and moving, and or the technology moving, just in the case of autonomous systems. So physics doesn't care about deadlines. Customers just, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not saying they don't care. In the grand scheme of things, they're not going to care about how difficult the engineering problem is. Right? As a consumer, when we have our phone, if it doesn't turn on, it's a brick to us. We don't care, many of us, right? Don't care how it was achieved to be this way. We're just like, you're surprising and delighting us. Great, I can make a phone call and so forth, right? And regulators, right? They're not in the details. Are they going to care about how innovative your product is, right? Or innovative your product was, right? Because their focus, again, swim lanes, right? Regulation. So from a liability standpoint is what caused harm and to what extent did we say we were compliant? And if we weren't compliant, well, it's a liability. So last, when intelligent systems interact with people, right, every product decision becomes a leadership decision. So to your point, Rachel, on the optics, right, there's liability, there's legal. How do we see, assess, document, and measure what matters is what matters, right? So like If I think about the leadership shifts, right, that at least I've seen, I've been blessed to see, and it's still evolving. I'm still adapting. We all are, especially as technology keeps evolving, is a shift from building features to building trust. And when we do that, right, trust comes from predictable behavior, right? The causality of this, of course, is there a liability there or not? I'm not an attorney, so I can't speak as extensively in that regard. But when we talk about trust, right, what I can speak about is trust based on predictable behavior. Second is transparency, right? We can point to a case, Cruz as an example. At least the evidence shows publicly and from the literature out there, they weren't as transparent when they had an incident that unfortunately ended up dragging a pedestrian, right? Due to that lack of transparency, accountability, and documentation, unfortunately, Cruise is an autonomous vehicle that is no longer present, right? That said, there's a ripple effect to autonomy and autonomous vehicles in general, right? Okay, so I digress with an example. So transparency, resilience, and recoverability. The expectation isn't perfection, right? So you're not going to free any product from all of its hazards. Hopefully, you've prioritized the hazard, you've minimized the risk, and as a result, potentially minimize your liability. So, I'll stop. Maybe I'll say the second shift and the third shift, and I will provide examples just so that we can address other questions, which is second is, you manage your roadmaps with risk in mind. Again, not safety last, safety first in the design, or when we think about product life cycle. It's from design to release a product. And there's a lot of time between the start of that design and the release of product. Granted, there's a life cycle, so you might have several iterations of design. That said, if you have your safety and the hazards that start and are tip of tongue, not just for the safety team, but the organization, then it isn't, process for the sake of process. It's process for the purposeful intention of we're building products that are going in the hands of humans, and we want to safeguard the lives, reduce the risk and harms of those humans. And if we do that, that's part of culture and organizational culture. So that's what I would lean in. It doesn't directly answer the law aspect of it. I'm not an attorney. I apologize. I can't answer that directly. It really answers the more organizational and focus on safety as first and not last.
Yeah, that really resonates. And, I think with a lot of products that, I've seen developed and been part of developing at Microsoft, it was ingrained, maybe not as transparent throughout the journey. Certainly a lesson I think that we all continue to learn. However, we viewed, when we launched the Xbox as the day they launched was not the end. In fact, we would say commonly, it is literally the beginning. And so keeping up with how people are using those and what they're doing with them and what experiences they may have that are good or bad. And if anything remotely unsafe happens, having the systems in place to get that data, right, to know what's happening and be able to debug it right away and address it as quickly as possible. I know the boards of companies sit and have these risk assessments. I've been part of those conversations at Microsoft as well. So it is certainly that, it's a cultural thing. It's ingrained into your product ethos. And I think even more so now, we need that with AI ingrained from the beginning, as opposed to an afterthought. So we talked a little bit about regulatory. There was a question from Philip in the chat around regulatory. I think you addressed some of this, but they asked, with this rapid pace of commercial development, and if a company is pushing OTA updates every 2 weeks, how can the bodies, the regulatory organizations, make informed validation and certification decisions? So do you have any additional thoughts on that? Are you seeing any change in how the regulatory organizations are approaching autonomous products?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer it in aggregate, which is as part of the over-the-air updates every 2 weeks, there's just to anchor us, there's a process, whether it be SDLC, software development lifecycle, for continuous integration and continuous in development. There are gates internal to the organization that need to be addressed and passed. There's also additional gates for safety critical systems, for safety functions as part of your safety strategy. So assuming that safety management system is in place, you have sign-offs from design to product release, then it's a matter of standards. Most standards, I think to the underpinning point here, they take a really long time right, to be enacted, right, whether it's regulations and standards. And so many of the safety organizations that I have been part of are always keeping a pulse as to what is changing. Does it generally impact over the air updates every 2 weeks? The only incidences that I have seen that manifest itself is the Waymo. Waymo has had a couple of incidents in terms of not stopping when school buses not stopping for a pedestrian that was a child. And so, when all units are sort of decommissioned for that period of time. I mean, I've seen those sorts of over the air sort of updates. At least we've also read about it in the news publicly. In terms of how it relates to standard, that there's not this like immediate handshake stop over the air. There's more time that it takes for that to be enacted. So, how many have decided to work with regulators is to work with the regulators, to be very transparent with the regulators about your operations across a wide variety of features, simulation, structured, unstructured testing. But also, there are conversations and conferences where many of these experts from each of these different companies are meeting with these regulators ahead of the regulation being deployed for active feedback and continuous feedback in that loop. And then there's informal conversations where there's brainstorming sessions. I believe we could improve upon that, where we say, hey, let's just brainstorm about the future of autonomy. What does that look like for each of these different industries? So it's not perfect. We certainly live in an imperfect world. There's a lot of improvement that can be had in this regard, especially to minimize hazards on the road, as an example. Great question. I don't have a good answer.
It's a complicated one, and probably the regulatory agencies are asking themselves that question probably every day too. So we'll shift a little bit. There was a question kind of getting back to the systems-based approach to safety. So how you think about that in particular, is that a broader systems theoretical socio-technical approach, or is it using specific methodologies like system dynamics for modeling, or looking at something different? I know you talked about different, frameworks you're using, but maybe I think the question is how do you think about that in terms of safety across those systems?
Yeah, great question. Because I highlighted sort of the shift in like leadership. The first one, building features to building trust. The second, managing roadmap maps to managing risk. The third one is really an existential, more social one. And then I'll give some granularity in tactically what I do and I use. And would welcome your thoughts, Rachel, as well, in this regard. So shift three, I would say, is um, shipping products to designing organizations, because it's very much a mindset, a growth mindset that's needed to be employed to establish that trust, like we highlighted. Um, the biggest safety failures, I would say, if we read in the literature, I haven't been part of a significant safety failure, just to be transparent. But time will tell. Hopefully, we keep that track record. They're usually not technology failures. They're actually organizational failures because of the prioritization of ship now, ship now, ship now. After the fact, there was an incident, a near miss. Let's analyze it, triage. And so you're sort of playing whack-a-mole, unfortunately, right? To triaging a risk that could have been foreseen or foresawn, right? So it's organizational failures, poor escalation, right? There isn't this transparency. Who do we go to? Who do we talk to? Who has clear ownership in the form of a RACI or RACIC, right? Roles and responsibilities across the organization for escalation. Third is there's poor incentives. Actually, in the case of Cruise, again, you can look this up. There's a case study out there. The incentives to have a safety first culture were not transparent and persistent. I wasn't part of Cruise, so I can't tell you that firsthand. This is reading very same literature that you would be reading in a case study. So poor incentives, no dissent, there's siloed ownership, and there's a lack of operational learning. So this sort of culture of retrospectives. How are we learning? How are we measuring what matters to say that we've actually improved upon our design, our execution, our escalation? And so that sort of answers a socio-technical technical approach to what are the mechanisms in the organization. Then, okay, where's your safety management system? What does that look like? Can I go to someone or to the safety engineer or to a leader and say, from the start of the product, which has a product requirements description document that says, here are the features that we signed up for because the market research and the customer suggests that this will be an amazing product. Then we go on design all the way through what we would call verification and validation, but in the at scale production world, it's EVT, DVT, PVT. So engineering validation test, design validation test, product design, product validation test, and then product launch, right? So if you can't go to someone and have that product development plan completely elucidated, elaborated with tests and then safety gates, so that means you have safety functions, product goals. There's a safety strategy that says our product goals meets these safety functions for these safety gates for product launch, right? If that's not transparent, right, there's something broken and wrong. And even if it's broken and wrong, then we say, well, what's the gap analysis? Because if you're in the prototype phase, well, you have your training wheels on, right? You're crawling, you're stepping, then running. And so you can improve upon that which there are gaps. So it's not that you stopped, oh goodness, we can't do this product because we don't have all this in place. Well, no, that's not how product development works and innovation works. So you can iterate. Now to your last point, like what mechanisms, when it comes to safety critical systems, there are a variety of pieces of literature that are foundational. I mentioned Dr. Oliver Weck. He teaches a class. I forget which department. I apologize that I forget, but effectively it's sort of how to be an effective CTO, right? I would argue it behooves everyone, even if that is not your goal, understanding how technology is built from its life cycle, just like we understand software from its software development life cycle and stages from initial to release to continuous integration development. His is a great course. That's where I drew the Atra framework, which I highlighted. We can send out some references after this chat. Second would be actually Professor Levinson. Again, I forget the department. Apologies. She has written a variety of works from Safeware, looking at safety from computer lens, but also has from basically bits, right? So very apropos to when we think about AI, or even as we lean into AI regulation from the EU AI Act and others. There's also introduction to system safety engineering. And I think she's also written Safer World. So Levinson, and there's Koopman, who wrote How Safe, two different, I believe he's from Carnegie Mellon, two different views. One that has been actively embedded in autonomous vehicles, regulatory and standards. So Koopman has How Safe is Safe Enough. And there's another book. Do I have it here? Oh yeah, Embodied, so happens I have it. So Embodied AI Safety, you can't see it, but I'll send it later. But it's called Embodied AI Safety, and it's at the intersection of machine learning, safety engineering, cybersecurity, and design. So all great platforms that I use. And then lastly, Rachel would love your opinion too. The system dynamics, I have used sort of reinforcement loops and so forth, more as a brainstorming aspect of the causality, right? What's increasing what? I don't use it in meetings, quite frankly, because then it's sort of like you have to teach everyone how you learned system dynamics. But rather I leverage those diagrams for clear takeaways, right? And if it's apropos to a smaller subset, then we'll work through, well, how did we arrive at sort of these conclusions and the causality? That was a mouthful. Rachel, what have you used? And how does this similarly apply in Microsoft?
Yeah, I'll share that. And then we also have a dovetail question too, which I think will be great. So from my perspective and kind of like this big impact area, most of that work so far was in my time at Microsoft. I also was the chief of staff for all the devices. So across the whole hardware end-to-end development, including industrial design, supply chain, manufacturing, all of that side of it for every product piece of hardware that comes out of Microsoft. I used to sit under one big org under our chief product officer. And One thing that I found is that while these frameworks are great and bringing those into the conversations can be really, really helpful, I am a huge believer that the products that we build directly reflect the team who builds them. And so from that kind of third bullet that you talk about, the organization and the leadership, I consciously try to have more voices at the table. And I think we do that through transparency. I actually believe the more you're transparent with the team, the less your chance of something catastrophic going wrong, and the higher your chance of somebody saying, I'll handle it. I'll step up and handle it because they know. And all people naturally, we want to help. We want to contribute. We want to have an impact. And so when I was inside of that big org, and even when I crossed into Xbox, we worked in between orgs. So we didn't see business units, right? Even though it hit different P&Ls. For Xbox, the majority of the team who was helping us in our lifecycle engineering, while it was run out of my team, they were sitting inside the devices org. And it's those decades of conversations and working together in the past and being able to bring those voices in that I think ultimately can lead you to the best and fastest kind of solutions, or planning ahead and then reacting as you need to. So I think that's just a kind of one aspect of that third bullet that I just continue to believe in, and I think it's, again, more important now because it is so easy to just move so fast that you don't go to somebody's office and have a conversation. But my hope is that we continue doing that and have that human in the loop also in our own loops, if you will. So looking on kind of this dovetail question related to that, as autonomous systems spread, does the risk go from more localized, for example, an accident on a particular road, the road gets shut down, traffic gets diverted for a while, to the more systemic autonomous vehicle accident in a city, all vehicles that drive in the city's fleet or beyond are grounded for OTA updates clearances? How do you think about the localization versus the breadth of autonomous systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think great question. I'm trying to think about how to answer it simply. I don't think there's a simple answer for this one. I mean, we can draw on the example of recent Waymo's halted in wet areas that had really huge puddles, right? And then shortly after the fact, you saw probably a LinkedIn or news article that talked about Waymo's ability to detect puddles. Right. So there's a causality there. And so why is this relevant is probably what most folks are asking, which is they did ground their fleet as it relates to puddles and water. These were big puddles, right? And it brings us back to the sense, think, and act, right? What about the data? Now, there is a sort of phone home access point within a Waymo, right? If it gets confused, right, it will ask for backup. And then there's over-the-air feedback for the next series of steps. Right. It is amazing. And of course you can say I'm biased because I used to work there. I have no vested interest right now. I'm not talking on behalf of Waymo in any particular way. This is my own sort of opinion, which is, as a scientist, it's amazing that we haven't had more incidences with autonomous vehicles, quite frankly. So when we think about causality and that which we can simulate and that which we wouldn't want to ever test in the real world or see from the standpoint of hazard and a lack of safety, as we start to deploy more and more vehicles, so the number of deployed vehicles is not reaching parity with the number of vehicles on the road, right? I mentioned a number, whether it be Tesla or Toyota, 500,000 vehicles per year are manufactured, right? And then you have a rate of occurrence and incidence of human traffic accidents, not drive-by-wire. So as inevitably, to answer your question of sort of like rate of incidence, we have not seen sort of the tail edge cases that might ensue due to a vehicle being driven by wire, right? Driven by a computer. And so it would not surprise me that we would have an increase. I hope not, right? Just because that pulls at my heartstrings. It is surprising that we haven't had more incidents, quite frankly. And that speaks to potentially the transparency, accountability, level of testing in relation to what Waymo and other, Zoox is another one that we haven't heard as many incidences. So to your point on localizing whether it's city or urban. I mean, really, it's a function of density and ML driven use cases and training. So that's a hard one to answer, just because as a scientist, I'd want to quantify it, and I just don't have that data. But I can point us to, the Waymo safety framework, right? And the KPIs. So if we were able to, and if we did have access to geography, simulated miles, driven miles, safety compared to the human driver response time, because that is the benchmark, right? It's not, um, are we going to be perfect? It's compared to a human driver reaction and causality of beginning of their reaction to the end of the reaction, how much equivalent or better is an autonomous driver. So I know that didn't like sufficiently answer your question. I kind of skirted around it purposefully because I just don't know how to answer that first part of the question. But hopefully some part of my answer gave you some there was some leverage to be had there. Yeah. But
Yeah, that question's interesting. It's very complex. It also brings in, I think, a societal government aspect that I'm not sure if Sharad was thinking about as well with that. But I remember when Segway was being invented, Dean came and brought it to MIT. It was back when I was doing my master's in mechanical engineering there. Took it into Kresge, drove it down the steps in Kresge and back up. And we were all like, this is awesome. This is going to be so amazing. It's going to change the world. And ultimately, what ended up, really putting damper into the success of that was that cities and states regulated where that could be used because it was so novel and so different that I think people didn't understand how the tech worked with the Segway, that they were afraid of it. And so, I haven't seen recent case studies, but I remember back in the day, a lot of that was because cities and governments got involved. And so I think there's an aspect here for sure, which I'm sure plays into that question as well, whether cities and local governments kind of have their own input on what the response is, right? I imagine that's some of it. I mean, certainly if they even have them there, right? We all see that happening very, very quickly. So in the last we're about 5 minutes, I would love to get to kind of pivot a little bit. I think there's a fantastic question around kind of looking at careers, which we've talked about a little bit, but there's a very specific one around that was sent, young girls in STEM. And so, Christy, I think this is something that I know you and I is very, very, very close to us. It's something that we spend a lot of time mentoring and guiding, and every chance that we get to how to support the next generation as mothers, but also just as humans who know that is the definition of progress, right? So the question is how would you approach it differently, your career, if you had graduated recently and you didn't have access to opportunities in advanced technology? So as you're sitting today and all of this, stuff happening, what advice would you give to young girls interested in STEM?
yeah, I'll make mine short because I would love to hear your perspective too. I mean, what would I do differently? Honestly, I have been absolutely blessed with mentors that have lifted me up. That's not to say all organizations have lifted me up, but I feel privileged in that that has been my case. I would seek out mentors and I would go out of your way to ask questions. In full transparency, there have been moments in time I have learned over time to improve upon this, but there have been moments in time where I've left a meeting or a room or a place that I would have wanted to ask a question and I didn't. And it might have been the fear in my heart, in my mind, telling me that it wasn't the right question or apropos question, or it was a silly question. And I have found that the best questions are the ones not asked, not only by myself, but by others that I've worked with. And really, I would say focusing on how you can be helpful to others. I had a mentor at Apple pretty much said a lot of his goals in many conversation is to see how he can be helpful to 5 people. Because you never know at some point in time where those 5 people will be. And that's not your goal, right? Your goal isn't for where they might end up being, but rather being helpful together is always prudent. And we just make right society and things and people that much better for it. So, and last, I would say I'm a lifelong learner. So to your question, I still feel like my knowledge is nascent. In fact, what the PhD taught me was how much I don't know, not how much I do know. And so because of that, I'm always like trying to be a sponge, whether it's podcasts. Rachel actually introduced me to an amazing podcast, right? And having a community of girlfriends, of humans, of people that are lifting you up, informing you, educating you. So that's what I would argue. Ask questions, find the right people that are going to be helpful to you, and just keep learning, right? Just because you don't know it today doesn't mean you won't know it tomorrow, right? Yeah, Rachel.
I totally, that all resonates with me. And I had not seen your first slide in this presentation. But I can say it 1,000% did not surprise me. I think you and I share a common belief. And in fact, I think the majority of people who go through MIT, whether it's through the Sloan School or on the engineering side, from my perspective, there's a red thread that connects us. And it is so ingrained in the ecosystem across MIT. We don't do any of this alone. Like in life, we do not do anything alone. And so I try to have any conversation, answer any question, all of the things, even, for cousins or siblings or my niece, like, yes, I always say yes. It may take me a month or a week or a couple months to get back to people, but I try to never drop those. I think that is a part of progress, right? Helping the next generation move faster and quicker and smarter so that we can always improve. Why do we have to repeat mistakes? Like, we can learn so much from each other. I'm a big believer in that. And, it's a nice segue into this group, right? That is a huge reason why this group started, right? This is the Product Management Community of Practice. It was driven by some alum who said, we would love to have a place where we can come together with a shared kind of common belief and a passion for product making, a passion for building things, a passion for impact. And this group was started about a year ago, and we have 300 something members across alum, current students, faculty. We have people inside of Sloan, people outside of Sloan, and hopefully these conversations help you feel that. I know I've learned a ton today from you, Christy. So we're really, really grateful for you being here and sharing all your knowledge with us. I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate the direct message questions. Can we create a space where people want to ask questions, even if it's anonymously? I love seeing that. Let's use technology to help us all have a voice at the table. So with that, I don't know, Shauna, if anybody isn't part of the group and you'd like to be part of the group, please feel free to sign up on our LinkedIn. It's the MIT Sloan PM Community of Practice. It's a private group. And then reach out to any of us if you have any questions or want to have an additional conversation, or if your child or niece or nephew wants to. I hope you all had a great time here today. Shauna, anything else to add before we wrap it up?
Just thank you to you as well, Rachel. Thank you, Christy. This has been great. And thank you for everyone for being part of it. Really, really special event. So we're grateful to both of you and everyone who could be here. Stay tuned for more events.
Definitely. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.